God said that there won't be any king from this family anymore, and that's when he found David. David was a man for the God's heart, and he said that David will be the next king. But sure, Saul didn't want to hear that. And what happens, there was a lot of tension between them. But at the same time, David became good friend with Saul's son, Jonathan. And so they were friends. And at some point in the past, when they had a talk, David and Jonathan, they had a talk. Jonathan told David, David, I understand that when God chooses someone, that's the way it's going to be. Nobody can change what God is going to do. And God said that you will be the king. And I understand that. Even though my father is a king now, and I'm supposed to be a king after my father, but I understand that I won't be a king, David will be a king. So that's the conversation. That's how they were talking. And then Jonathan got to the point, he said, David, when you become a king, just be merciful to me. Why did he ask that? Why did he say that? Well, at that time, when somebody, for example, if the kingdom goes from one family to another family, the new king is supposed to kill all the people from the other family, from the family of the king. So there is nobody in that family who will ever become candidate to become a king of this land. That's how it was done in the past. So what was supposed to happen, David was supposed to kill and slaughter all the people from the Saul's family so that nobody can ever inherit the kingdom. And that's how people lived at that time. We don't do this now. It's maybe there are some places. Well, actually, no. Let me take my words back. Actually, there are some countries that's when the president or king or whatever, the ruler of that country, when he becomes old or they'll start getting some commotions in the people that want to overthrow this person. Well, that's what they do. They start killing people around them just so that they can keep their power. But that's beyond the point of the story. So David was supposed to kill Jonathan, his best friend, and kill all of the family of the Jonathan, so that nobody from that family would ever become a king. And that's why Jonathan is asking, David, when you become a king, he is not questioning God's authority. He is not questioning God's sovereignty. He accepted that David will become a king and said, when it gets to that point, please be merciful to me and my family. Basically, just don't kill us. Don't destroy us. Just, we'll be on the background. We'll disappear from the sight. We'll never claim our right to become kings. Nothing. Just be merciful to us. So that's what's happening. There were a lot of things that happened since Saul and Jonathan died, and there were a lot of wars. Philistines, they really tried to attack, and David won all the wars. And there was a quiet moment when David sat down and just started thinking, well, I gave this promise to Jonathan, my dear friend. I promised him years ago that I will be merciful. There was a covenant between them that I'll be merciful to his family. And that's what's happening. And then David said, is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant in the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David, and the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am, your servant. The king said, is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet. So the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, behold, there is the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-debar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he said, here's your servant. David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly. Again he prostrated himself and said, what is your servant that you should regard as a dead dog like me? Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to all his house I have given to you, to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth has a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. This is a story. This is quite an exciting story of how mercy and grace actually works in everyday life. There was nothing, other than the covenant, other than the promise that David gave to Jonathan. Well, Jonathan was gone. And according to the law of the land, he should be destroying, he should be removing anybody who can ever become a king. And actually, this lame guy, this crippled guy, he is supposed to be the king of the land. He is supposed to become a king, because if you think about it, that Saul is dead and Jonathan is dead, and there was another son that was also killed, and this crippled guy should be a king. But he is hiding because he knows that David became a king, and David can actually, should actually kill him. And that's what's happening. He is sitting at home in the land that's, I looked in a dictionary, the translation of the place where this crippled guy lived was, the translation is empty land, or no land. Land that has nothing. It's an empty, well, it's not exactly empty space, but it probably didn't have anything good. It probably didn't have grass for the sheep. It didn't have enough soil for them to grow and cultivate anything. So this was pretty poor part of the country, and that's where he was hiding, because he was afraid that he'll be killed by King David, which would be appropriate again by the traditions of that time. And then he sees this soldiers that come and knock on the door and say, well, the king wants to see you. And I think that was enough for him to probably say the final goodbyes to all the people that lived with him. And we know from history that actually he became crippled because the nanny, the lady that was taking care of him when he was little, when she knew that David became a king, she started running with him and she dropped him. That's how sad his life is. He was born as a probably normal kid, and he was just dropped. And his both legs were broken, and since that point he was crippled for the rest of his life. He never knew any good life. He never knew any life that would be intended for a son of the kings. You know, he was coming from a family of the kings, but he never knew that. He lived somewhere in a nowhere land, and he probably was just fed by whatever leftovers people were giving him. There's really no mentioning of how he lived. But now he is there to, what he is thinking, to actually accept what he should have had a long time ago. He should be killed. So he comes to David, he drops on his knees here, and it doesn't matter that his feet hurt or his legs hurt or broken or whatever else. He is laying on the floor, he is thinking, that's it, maybe I'll just get a little bit of mercy, maybe I'll just postpone it, or just continue living a little bit more of my miserable life. And then he hears this from David, that David says, I decided to give you this mercy. I decided to do this grace to you. You didn't deserve it. You don't own any part of it. It's something that I, as a king, decided to give you. And he says that I will give you all the land that your grandfather had, and you will be eating at my table. And for some reason, this moment of eating at David's table is mentioned 4 times. I think that was probably the highest honor that anybody could get at that time. Why would they mention it 4 times? 4 times, and he was eating at the David's table, and even one time as one of the king's sons, he was eating at the table. And we already named the children of David, at least the ones that we knew. He was like one of the gods of the David's children eating at the table. That's the greatest honor. Why? Because David wanted to do this. The parallel that we have with our time, or with God's grace, is that God wanted to save people. He decided to save people, and He is going to do this regardless of how lame we are, regardless of how crippled and how disgusting, how stained, how soiled our clothes are, regardless of everything else that became part of our life. He invites us to be at His table because He is the King and He wants it. We need to understand the invitation. We need to understand the high power and the highest invitation that we receive. Actually, you remember there's a parable in the scripture when God says to His servant, go invite people to my house. Yes? Remember, there's a wedding, and just go and invite people to come to my house. And people start giving Him all kinds of excuses why they cannot come to His house. And why is this happening? Because they don't understand how high of an honor it is to be invited to that house. He knew how honored he was to be at David's table. Because instead of death, he was accepted as a part of the family. And the same thing happened to us when we fell, when the humanity fell and broke all the legs and all the limbs and all the possible bones in our body. And that's what sin does to people. It breaks everything. It breaks everything that is good in people. When God created humans, He created us good. He created us so good that, first of all, He Himself gave this high, what's the right word? High mark. This is very good. He'll look at, oh, this is, well, let me use this word. Since I'm preaching to a young crowd, right? This is very good. When He looked at one, oh, just look at me. If He looks at me, is that good? No, it's pretty fat, pretty old. And so this is not good. But the way God created humans was good, was really good. But then came a sin. And that sin broke everything in a human